The December rain hammered against the windows of Pinewood Elementary School with a kind of relentless fury that made children press their faces to glass and wonder if the weather had forgotten it was supposed to stop eventually. 7-year-old Emma Wilson sat cross-legged on the worn carpet of the multipurpose room, her small fingers tracing patterns in the faded linoleum that decades of footsteps had rubbed smooth. All around her, chaos swirled like a storm she couldn't quite escape. Children shrieked about Santa and presents and family gatherings that seemed to exist in some other universe entirely. Teachers fought losing battles against excitement that had reached fever pitch on this last day before winter break. Parents clustered near doorways wearing expressions that mixed exhaustion with forced holiday cheer in equal measure. Emma kept her gaze fixed on a loose thread in her donated sweater green and 2 sizes too large, smelling faintly of fabric softener that belonged to someone else's life. Ms. Reynolds, the school counselor, had pulled it from the donation bin that morning when Emma arrived in just a t-shirt despite temperatures hovering near 40 degrees. The cold never bothered Emma the way it seemed to bother other children. She had learned early that discomfort was simply another constant like hunger or the ache that lived permanently in her chest when she watched other kids get collected by parents who smiled like they meant it. The multi-purpose room served triple duty as cafeteria, assembly hall, and gymnasium depending on what hour you caught it. Today it was decorated with construction paper snowflakes and strings of lights that flickered with concerning irregularity. Emma had helped make some of those snowflakes during art class last week, carefully cutting folded paper exactly like Ms. Chen had demonstrated. Hers had come out lopsided despite her best efforts. They were probably the ugly ones tucked near the emergency exit where nobody would look too closely. Ms. Reynolds' voice cut through the noise with that gentle weight Emma had learned to recognize as pity dressed up as concern. "Emma, honey, we need to talk about the arrangements for tonight." Emma's stomach contracted into a fist. Arrangements. That word always preceded something bad. "Your aunt called." Ms. Reynolds crouched beside her knees, cracking audibly. She was a round woman in her 50s with graying hair, pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that had witnessed too many broken children. "She said they won't be able to take you for Christmas break after all." "There's been a situation with your cousin," Emma interrupted before Ms. Reynolds could continue, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's okay. I understand." But she didn't understand, not really. How could she understand why Aunt Teresa had promised 3 weeks ago that this Christmas would be different, that Emma could stay through New Year's, that maybe it could become permanent? How could she understand why those promises evaporated like rain on hot pavement every single time Aunt Teresa had said it with such conviction, looking Emma directly in the eyes and promising that she was done shuffling between relatives like an unwanted package nobody wanted to claim? Emma had let herself believe it because the alternative was too dark to contemplate. Ms. Reynolds' jaw tightened in that way Emma recognized as anger directed at someone else, never at her. "Your Uncle Frank is on his way to pick you up. He'll take you to your grandmother's house for tonight, and we'll figure out the rest after the holiday." Grandmother. The word should have conjured images of cookies and warm embraces. Instead, Emma pictured the cramped apartment that smelled of cigarettes and old cooking oil, where Grace Wilson spent most days in a recliner staring at game shows with the volume cranked too loud. Grace was 68 but looked 80, worn down by decades of hard choices that had accumulated into a face full of regret. She had raised Emma's mother poorly and would admit as much to anyone who asked, and seemed to view Emma as evidence of that failure repeating itself like a curse passing through generations. Emma's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Does she know I'm coming?" The pause before Ms. Reynolds answered communicated everything. "Your uncle will sort it out. You know how family can be during the holidays." Emma finished the thought silently busy. Everyone was always busy when it came to her. Through the large windows, Emma watched the Oregon rain transition to sleet, the sky the color of old bruises. Pinewood sat nestled in the Cascade foothills, a logging town that had witnessed better decades. Main Street still maintained a hardware store, a diner, and raised gas and go, but half the storefronts stood empty with faded for lease signs papering their windows. The mill had closed 5 years ago, and the town was slowly hemorrhaging population. The people who remained were either too stubborn to leave or too broke to afford anywhere else. Emma had been born in Portland back when her mother Angela was still attempting to hold things together. But the city had been too expensive, the temptations too available, and they had ended up here in Pinewood with Grace in the Section 8 housing complex on the east side of town. Emma barely remembered those early years, just fragments of her mother's laugh before the drugs won, the way she used to braid Emma's long dark hair before everything fell apart. The morning Emma woke up to find Angela cold and still on the bathroom floor, her lips blue, her eyes open, but seeing nothing. Ms. Reynolds' voice pulled Emma back to the present, firmer now. "Emma, look at me." When Emma finally met her eyes, she saw something that resembled determination. "I'm going to make some calls over the break. We're going to find you a better situation, a real placement. This isn't right, and I'm not going to let it continue. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, though she had heard similar promises before. The system was overwhelmed, Ms. Reynolds had explained during one of their previous conversations. There weren't enough foster families, especially for older kids with what the files diplomatically termed behavioral challenges. Emma wasn't sure what her specific challenges were exactly, except that they seemed to make people uncomfortable, something whispered about in conversations she wasn't supposed to overhear. The bell rang and the room erupted in celebration. Kids grabbed backpacks and lunchboxes, streaming toward waiting parents like water finding. Cracks. Emma watched them disappear one by one until the multi-purpose room stood nearly empty. Just her Ms. Reynolds and Jenna Kim, whose father was always late because he worked the day shift at the hospital in Bend, 40 minutes away. Jenna adjusted her glasses and spoke without being asked, her voice carrying simple certainty. "He'll be here soon. My dad. He's always late, but he comes." The confidence in those words struck Emma like a physical blow. What must it be like to know without doubt that someone would show up for you, to have that kind of faith that transcended disappointment and delay? Emma had no reference point for that kind of security. She existed in a state of perpetual uncertainty, never quite sure where she would sleep next week or whether the adults around her would remember she existed. 20 minutes later, Uncle Frank's truck pulled into the parking lot. Emma recognized the rusted blue Ford from previous pickups, its muffler held together with wire and duct tape, exhaust billowing white in the cold air. Frank was Grace's son from her first marriage, a man in his 40s with a beer belly and perpetually bloodshot eyes that suggested he spent his evenings nursing something stronger than soda. He wasn't cruel exactly, just profoundly indifferent. Emma represented a chore to be completed, like taking out trash or paying a bill you resented. Ms. Reynolds walked Emma out carrying the small backpack that contained everything Emma owned: a change of clothes, a toothbrush, and the tattered paperback of Charlotte's Web that was the only possession that felt genuinely hers. The sleet stung Emma's face as they crossed the parking lot. Frank barely glanced at her as she climbed into the passenger seat. His grunt was the closest thing to a greeting she would receive. "Seatbelt." He was already pulling away before Ms. Reynolds had fully closed the door. The drive to Grace's apartment took 12 minutes through Pinewood's quiet streets. Frank said nothing, just played classic rock low on the radio and drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. Emma watched the town slide past the boarded-up mill, the church with its crooked nativity scene missing two wise men, the dollar store where everything actually cost $1 or less. Christmas lights were strung across Main Street, but half the bulbs had burned out, giving the decorations a gap-toothed appearance that matched the town's general sense of decline. Everything in Pinewood felt like it was slowly giving up, surrendering to forces too large to fight. Grace's apartment complex sat at the edge of town, a collection of identical two-story buildings with peeling yellow paint and rusted railings that left orange stains on your hands if you touched them. Frank parked but kept the engine running, clearly eager to complete his obligation and depart. His voice carried the particular discomfort of someone fulfilling a duty he resented. "Listen, your grandmother's not feeling great. Try not to be a problem." Emma nodded. She had perfected the art of not being a problem. It meant being invisible, needing nothing, wanting nothing, existing as a shadow that consumed no resources and generated no conflict. Frank finally turned to face her, and she saw something in his expression that might have been guilt or might have been indigestion. "It's not that people don't, it's just complicated, you know." She didn't know, but she nodded anyway, because that's what adults wanted, the appearance of understanding, even when nothing made sense. Frank added with the casualness of someone mentioning the weather, "Grace is drinking again. 3 years sober down the drain. Try not to upset her." The truck was already in reverse before Emma had fully closed the door. She watched his taillights disappear into the sleet and felt that familiar hollowness expanding in her chest. the place where other children seemed to have something warm and solid, something that kept them tethered to the world. In Emma, that space felt empty, like a room nobody had ever bothered to furnish. The building's entrance smelled of mildew and something burning that might have been someone's dinner, or might have been wiring overheating in the walls. Emma climbed the stairs to the second-floor apartment 2C and knocked softly. She could hear the television inside volume loud enough that Grace probably hadn't heard her. She knocked again harder this time. The door opened and Grace stood there in her bathrobe, a cigarette dangling from her lips, her expression shifting from confusion to irritation in the space between heartbeats. Her voice was gravel worn smooth by decades of smoking. "What are you doing here?" Emma kept her voice small, apologetic for existing. "Uncle Frank brought me for Christmas Eve. Aunt Teresa said she couldn't—" Grace spat the name like a curse. "Teresa couldn't organize a two-car parade. Get in here before you let all the heat out. And don't touch anything. I just cleaned." The apartment was small living room, flowing into kitchenette, one bedroom, one bathroom. It didn't look recently clean to Emma's eyes, but she had learned not to contradict adults about things that didn't matter. The television was tuned to a game show, and the coffee table was littered with scratch-off lottery tickets and an overflowing ashtray where cigarettes had been stubbed out with violence. Grace settled back into her recliner with a grunt. "I didn't know you were coming. Nobody tells me anything. Where are you supposed to sleep?" Emma's response was immediate. "The couch is fine. I don't need much." Grace's laugh was bitter. "Don't need much. Story of your life, isn't it?" Emma found half a sandwich wrapped in plastic in the refrigerator and a bruised apple. She ate standing at the kitchenette counter, trying to occupy as little space as possible. Through the window, she could see the parking lot, and beyond it, the dark expanse of pine forest that gave Pinewood its name. The sleet had transformed into snow-fat flakes that seemed to glow in the sodium vapor of street lamps. Somewhere in Pinewood, families were gathering around decorated trees. Children were sneaking peeks at presents wrapped in paper that crinkled invitingly. Parents were laughing over spiked eggnog and telling stories about the year that was ending. Somewhere in the world, there were homes filled with the kind of love that Emma had only witnessed in movies and television commercials. But here in apartment 2C, there was only the drone of the television, the acrid smell of cigarette smoke, and the cold certainty that she was once again exactly where no one wanted her to be. Emma pulled the oversized sweater tighter around her small frame and wondered not for the first time what it would take to become the kind of person that people actually wanted to keep. Emma woke on Christmas morning to silence. Not the peaceful silence of a house at rest, but the hollow quiet of a space where joy had forgotten to arrive. The apartment was cold. Grace kept the thermostat low to save on the electric bill, and the couch cushions had left uncomfortable ridges along Emma's side where she had slept curled into the tightest ball possible. Gray morning light filtered through thin curtains. Outside, Pinewood was covered in fresh snow that made everything look cleaner than it actually was, like cheap paint over rot. Emma sat up slowly, folding the thin blanket Grace had tossed at her the night before. On television, a local news anchor was discussing weather patterns with forced enthusiasm. Emma watched without really seeing her mind elsewhere. In approximately 48 hours, she would have to return to school, back to Miss Reynolds' office, back to uncomfortable conversations about finding a better fit. What happened to kids who never fit anywhere? The question haunted Emma constantly. She had asked Miss Reynolds once, trying to sound casual, like she was just curious. The counselor had given her a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes and assured Emma that every child found their place eventually. But Emma had seen enough kids cycle through Pinewood Elementary's intervention programs to know that eventually sometimes meant never. The apartment was stuffy, despite the cold air thick with stale cigarette smoke. Emma went to the kitchenette and poured herself a glass of water from the tap. The pipes groaned and clanked, and she heard Grace curse from the bedroom. The shout came through the closed door. "Keep it down out there," Emma whispered an apology that Grace probably couldn't hear. She spent the next hour sitting at the small kitchen table reading Charlotte's Web for probably the 20th time. The book's pages were soft and worn, the spine cracked from repeated openings. It had been her mother's once. Emma had found it in a box of Angela's things after the overdose. Inside the front cover, in faded pencil, someone had written, "To Angela, love, Mom." The grandmother who had given Angela this book had been dead for years before Emma was born. Sometimes Emma wondered if there was a curse on the women in her family, each generation more broken than the last, fractures spreading through bloodlines like cracks in ice. Grace emerged around 10, shuffling in slippers and ratty robe. She looked older into the morning light lines on her face, deeper, thin gray hair standing at odd angles. She went straight for the coffee pot without acknowledging Emma's presence. Her voice eventually emerged flat and distant. "There's cereal in the cupboard. Help yourself." Emma had already eaten the last of the generic cornflakes the night before but didn't mention it. "I'm not really hungry, thank you though." Grace turned with coffee mug in hand and studied Emma with an expression that was difficult to read. "You look just like her, you know. Your mother. Same eyes, same mouth. It's unsettling." Emma didn't know what to say to that. She had been told she resembled her mother before, but usually it was said with warmth like a compliment. From Grace, it sounded like an accusation, like Em had committed some crime by inheriting Angela's features. Grace continued settling into her recliner with a groan. "She was about your age when I realized I'd already lost her. 7, 8 years old. Already lying, already stealing. Some kids are just born wrong, I guess. Born with something missing inside them." The words landed like stones in Emma's stomach. Her voice came out small and defensive. "My mom was sick. Ms. Reynolds said addiction is a disease." Grace's laugh carried no humor. "Ms. Reynolds didn't have to raise her. That woman sees you for an hour a week and thinks she understands. But I'm the one who lived it. I'm the one who watched her destroy herself and everyone around her. And now here you are, and they expect me to—" She cut herself off, taking a long sip of coffee. The silence that followed was worse than the words. Emma wanted to say that she wasn't her mother, that she was trying her best to be good to be wanted. But the words stuck in her throat because a small, terrible part of her wondered if Grace was right. Maybe there was something wrong inside her. Maybe that's why nobody ever wanted to keep her. The morning dragged on with excruciating slowness. Grace watched television. Emma read her book. Neither of them acknowledged that it was Christmas, that this day should be different somehow, that there should be tree and presents and the kind of joy that other families took for granted. Around noon, Grace heated up a can of soup and they ate in silence. The only sounds, the scrape of spoons against bowls and canned laughter from the TV. It was just after 2 in the afternoon when they heard it, a sound like distant thunder rolling through the valley. Grace's head snapped up, her expression shifting to annoyance. Her voice carried suspicion. "What the hell is that?" The sound grew louder, more distinct. Not thunder at all, but engines. Many engines. The deep, rhythmic roar of motorcycles moving in formation. Grace pushed herself out of the recliner and went to the window, pulling the curtain aside. Her curse was creative. Jesus Christ. Emma joined her, standing on tiptoes to see past Grace's shoulder. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Motorcycles, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, rolling into the parking lot of the apartment complex in a seemingly endless stream. They weren't just any motorcycles. These were heavy bikes, Harleys mostly chrome gleaming, even under the overcast sky. And the riders Emma had seen bikers before passing through Pinewood, on their way to somewhere else. But never like this, never this many. They wore leather jackets, and as they began to park their bikes in neat rows, Emma could see the patches on their backs. Death heads with wings spread wide, skulls grinning from leather. And words stitched in bold letters, Hell's Angels Motorcycle Club. Different chapters too. Oregon, California, Washington, Nevada. The patches varied slightly, but the message was universal and unmistakable. Grace muttered under her breath, "This can't be good. We're probably about to get robbed or worse." But Emma watched as the bikers dismounted, and they didn't look like they were there to rob anyone. Many of them were older, in their 50s and 60s, though some were younger, with the hard edges of people who had lived rough lives. There were women too, Emma noticed. Not many, but they were there, walking with the same confident swagger as the men. And they were carrying things, bags and boxes, wrapped presents, even a small Christmas tree. The procession seemed endless. More bikes kept arriving, parking wherever they could find space. In the lot, along the street, in the grass. Emma started counting, but lost track after 100, 203. She had never seen anything like it. The sound was overwhelming, a physical force that seemed to shake the building's foundations. Emma's voice came out as a whisper. "What are they doing?" Grace's certainty was already crumbling. Nothing good. The bikers began to gather in the parking lot, organizing themselves with military precision. A few of them, clearly the leaders, stood at the center directing the others. One man in particular caught Emma's attention. He was massive, easily 6'4", with a gray beard that reached his chest and arms covered in intricate tattoos. Despite his intimidating appearance, he was smiling, laughing with the bikers around him as they organized their cargo. Then someone knocked on the door, 3 firm raps that made Grace jump. Grace hissed at Emma, "Don't answer it." But Emma was already moving toward the door, driven by something she couldn't name. Curiosity, maybe, or the simple fact that anything, even potential danger, was better than the suffocating emptiness of the apartment. She opened the door before Grace could physically stop her. Standing in the hallway was a woman in her early 40s wearing a leather jacket with the Hells Angels patch and faded jeans. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her face, though lined from years of hard living, held surprising warmth. Behind her stood 2 men, both built like linebackers, their expressions neutral but not hostile. The woman crouched down to Emma's eye level. "Hey there, sweetheart. Is your name Emma?" Emma nodded, too surprised to speak properly. The woman's smile widened. "My name's Lisa. Lisa Moretti. I'm with the Hells Angels Oregon chapter. We got a call from a friend, a lady named Ms. Reynolds, who said there was a little girl here who might need some Christmas spirit. That you..." Emma's mind reeled. Miss Reynolds had called the Hells Angels. It seemed impossible, like something from a dream or a story that couldn't be real. Her voice came out uncertain. I don't understand." Lisa's expression remained patient and kind. "That's okay, honey. You don't have to understand. You just have to let us make Christmas happen. What do you say? Can we come in for a minute?" Grace appeared behind Emma, her hand clamping down on Emma's shoulder with enough force to leave marks. "Now wait just a minute. Who the hell are you people, and how did you get my granddaughter's name?" Lisa stood facing Grace with calm that had suggested she had handled difficult people before. "Ma'am, I'm Lisa Moretti. Every year, the Hells Angels chapters across the Northwest do a toy run for kids who need it. Usually we go to the children's hospital or a shelter, but this year Ms. Reynolds from Pinewood Elementary reached out to us about a specific situation." She continued, her voice steady and professional. "A little girl who needed to know she wasn't alone. That's all we're here to do. Bring some cheese, some food, spread some joy. We're not here to cause trouble." Grace's voice carried indignation. "Ms. Reynolds had no right," Lisa interrupted, her voice still calm but with an edge of steel. "Reynolds has every right to advocate for this child. Now we can do this one of 2 ways. You can let us give Emma a Christmas, or we can stand out here and make a scene. Your choice, ma'am. But either way, this little girl is getting a Christmas." Grace's face cycled through several emotions: anger, indignation, and finally resignation. She must have realized what Emma was already understanding. 500 bikers had just shown up, and they weren't leaving until they had accomplished what they came for. Grace's response came out tight and clipped. "Fine, but make it quick." Lisa's smile returned. She turned and gave a hand signal to the bikers waiting in the parking lot below. Suddenly, the world exploded into motion. Bikers began climbing the stairs carrying boxes and bags. But they didn't just come to apartment 2C. They spread throughout the complex, knocking on doors, handing out presents to every child they could find. The sound of children's laughter began to fill the air, punctuated by surprised gasps from parents and the ongoing rumble of motorcycle engines that had become a kind of soundtrack. Emma stood in the doorway watching in stunned silence as Lisa and 2 other bikers brought in armload after armload of gifts. A new winter coat in exactly her size, snow boots with fleece lining, clothes that didn't come from a donation bin, new jeans, sweaters, shirts with tags still attached. Books, so many books, including a pristine hardcover edition of Charlotte's Web that made Emma's throat tight with emotion. Art supplies in a plastic carrier, a stuffed animal, a brown bear with a red ribbon around its neck that was so soft Emma wanted to press her face into it and never let go. But it wasn't just Emma. Grace watched in shock as they brought in bags of groceries. Real food, not cheap staples, but quality items, fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, bread, cheese, coffee, even a small ham. And then, impossibly, they brought in a Christmas tree, a real one about 4 feet tall, complete with a stand. Lisa directed 2 younger bikers who looked thrilled to be handling tree duty. We'll set this up for you. Within 20 minutes, Grace's dingy apartment had been transformed. The Christmas tree stood in the corner decorated and glowing with lights that actually worked. Presents were piled underneath it in a mountain of wrapped packages. The kitchen counter was covered with groceries. And Emma stood in the center of it all, unable to process what was happening, her mind unable to accept that this was real and not some elaborate dream. The big man with the gray beard, the one Emma had noticed earlier, appeared in the doorway. He had to duck to enter the apartment, his presence immediately filling the small space. But when he looked at Emma, his eyes were gentle. His voice was a deep rumble. "Hey there, little miss. Name's Big Mike. Marcus Santoro, actually, but everyone calls me Big Mike. I'm president of the Oregon chapter. Ms. Reynolds told us about you, told us you needed some people in your corner." He held out a card, not a greeting card, but something official looking. Emma took it with shaking hands. It was a membership card for the Hells Angels Little Angels program, with her name printed on it and a phone number at the bottom. Big Mike tapped the card with a finger the size of a sausage. "That number there, that's a direct line. You ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call that number. Someone will answer. Someone will help. You understand, you're one of our little angels now. That means you're family." Emma looked up at this massive, tattooed man who society would probably call dangerous, who looked like he could bench press a car and saw only kindness in his eyes. Something inside her chest, that hollow, empty place, suddenly didn't feel quite so hollow anymore. Her voice came out as a whisper. "Thank you." Big Mike grinned, his whole face transforming. "Don't thank me yet. We got one more thing." He turned and shouted down the hallway. "Bring it up." Two bikers appeared carrying something large and unwieldy wrapped in a moving blanket. They brought it into the apartment and carefully unwrapped it. It was a bicycle, not a cheap one from a discount store, but a real mountain bike, purple and silver, with Emma's name painted on the frame in flowing script. Big Mike explained with obvious pride, "Custom job. One of our brothers owns a bike shop in Salem. When we heard about you, he stayed up all night putting this together. It's yours, kiddo. Merry Christmas." Emma couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She walked over to the bike, her hand reaching out to touch the handlebar as if it might disappear if she moved too quickly. Her name, her actual name painted on the frame in beautiful letters. Someone had made this specifically for her. Someone had stayed up all night thinking about her, working for her, believing she was worth the effort. The tears came suddenly overwhelming her. She had been so good at holding them back for so long, at being strong and not being a problem. But this broke something open inside her. She sobbed, her small shoulders shaking with 2 years of loneliness and rejection pouring out in waves she couldn't control. Lisa was there immediately, gathering Emma into a hug that smelled of leather and perfume, and something else, something that felt impossibly like safety. Her voice was gentle in Emma's ear. "Let it out, honey. Let it all out. You're allowed to feel this. You're allowed to be a kid." And Emma did. She cried into Lisa's jacket while 500 Hells Angels men and women, who the world called outlaws and criminals, stood in and around a crumbling apartment complex in Ashwood, Oregon, and proved that sometimes the most unexpected people are capable of the most extraordinary grace. The rest of Christmas Day unfolded like a dream Emma was afraid she would wake from. The bikers didn't just drop off presents and leave. They stayed. They transformed the parking lot into an impromptu celebration that Emma would remember for the rest of her life. Big Mike and Lisa took charge of what they called Christmas dinner. Some bikers produced portable grills and camp stoves from their saddlebags. Others made runs to raise Gas and Go, which had apparently agreed to open despite it being Christmas, for supplies. Within an hour, the smell of grilling meat and roasting vegetables filled the cold December air. Emma watched from Grace's window, still clutching the Little Angels membership card, as if letting go might cause all of this to vanish. The apartment complex, normally so quiet and depressing, had come alive. Children from neighboring apartments had emerged, drawn by the commotion and the promise of presents. The bikers were patient with each one, making sure every kid got something, even those whose parents seemed wary of the leather-clad strangers who had descended on their Christmas. Lisa's voice was gentle behind Emma. "You should go down there. The party's for you, sweetheart." Emma glanced at Grace, who sat in her recliner with an expression Emma couldn't quite read. Confusion, maybe, or discomfort at having her cynicism challenged so directly. Grace didn't look at Emma when she spoke. "Go on. Don't just stand there looking pathetic. It wasn't permission exactly, more like dismissal. But Emma would take it. She pulled on her new winter coat. It fit perfectly warm and comfortable, in a way her donated clothes never had been, and followed Lisa downstairs into the celebration. Big Mike's voice boomed across the lot as Emma emerged. There she is, the guest of honor. Suddenly, Emma found herself the center of attention as 500 faces turned her way. She froze, her instinct to make herself invisible, warring with the obvious fact that invisibility was no longer an option. But instead of the judgment or pity she had expected, she saw only warmth in those weathered faces. These were people who knew what it meant to be outsiders, to be judged by appearances rather than actions. They recognized one of their own. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and laugh lines approached, holding out a plate piled high with food. You must be starving, honey. I'm Diane. I've been riding with the angels for 30 years, and let me tell you, we take our food seriously. You got some of the best brisket in the Pacific Northwest right there. Emma took the plate with both hands, the weight of it substantial and real. Brisket, coleslaw, cornbread, green beans, and a slice of what looked like homemade apple pie. It was more food than she usually saw in a week. Her voice came out small. Thank you. Diane winked. Don't thank me. Eat. And then come find me. I brought my Polaroid camera, and we're going to take some pictures. You need memories, you know. As Emma ate, and the food was incredible, rich and flavorful, and made with obvious care, bikers came up to introduce themselves. There was Tommy from the Sacramento chapter, who did magic tricks with coins that made Emma giggle. There was Razor, whose fierce appearance and face full of tattoos didn't match his gentle voice, as he talked about his own daughter, now grown. There was Red, a woman in her 40s with appropriately red hair down to her waist, who worked as a nurse when she wasn't riding. Red sat down next to Emma on the curb. Here's the thing about family. Blood doesn't make family, choice does. We choose to look out for each other. We choose to show up when things get hard. That's what makes us brothers and sisters. That choice. Emma asked the question that had been burning in her mind. Ms. Reynolds told you about me, Red nodded. She reached out to our chapter about 3 weeks ago, said there was a little girl who was slipping through the cracks who needed to know someone gave a damn. The Angels have been doing toy runs for decades. It's part of who we are. But usually we go to hospitals or shelters, places with lots of kids. Ms. Reynolds asked if we could do something different this year. Something specifically for you. Emma's voice was barely audible. But why? Why would you do all this for someone you don't even know? Red's expression softened with understanding that came from lived experience. Because we've all been the kid that nobody wanted, Emma. Maybe not in the exact way you have, but every single person here knows what it feels like to be on the outside, to be judged, to be told they don't matter. And we decided a long time ago that when we see someone hurting like that, especially a kid, we do something about it. She pulled out a phone and showed Emma a photo of a young girl, maybe 10 years old, with the same striking red hair. That's my daughter, Stella. She's at her dad's place for Christmas, which is good. He's a good man. We just couldn't make it work. But when she was 7, right around your age, we were in a rough spot. I was working 3 jobs, barely keeping the lights on. And the Angels showed up for us, brought food, helped with rent, made sure Stella had a real Christmas. That's when I knew I wanted to be part of this. That's when I decided that if I ever got my life together, I'd pay it forward. Emma looked around the parking lot with new eyes. These weren't just random bikers doing a good deed for cameras or publicity. These were people who had lived through their own versions of pain and decided to transform it into something better. Her voice came out quiet, vulnerable, in a way she rarely allowed. Can I ask you something? Red's response was immediate. Anything, honey? Emma took a breath. Do you think there's something wrong with me, like something that makes people not want to keep me? Red's face crumpled for just a moment before she composed herself. When she spoke, her voice was fierce. Listen to me very carefully, Emma Wilson. There is nothing, and I mean nothing, wrong with you. You are 7 years old. You should be worried around homework and cartoons and whether your bike is cool enough. You should not be wondering why the adults in your life have failed you, because that's what's happened here. The adults have failed, not you, never you. The words hit Emma like a wave. Her voice cracked. But if I was better, maybe... Red's interruption was sharp but not unkind. No, no maybes, no what ifs. You could be the perfect child, the smartest, the quietest, the most well-behaved, and some people still wouldn't choose you because they're broken inside. That's not a reflection on you. That's on them. Big Mike appeared carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. He handed one to Emma and one to Red, then lowered himself to sit on the curb with them, his large frame making the simple action look comical. His voice rumbled. We having a serious conversation? Red nodded, just explaining some truths. Big Mike blew on his hot chocolate thoughtfully. You know, Emma, I grew up in foster care, bounced around from when I was 5 until I aged out at 18. 13 different homes in 13 years. Emma looked up at him in surprise. This massive, confident man who commanded respect from hundreds of bikers had been like her. Big Mike continued reading her expression. Yeah, hard to believe now, right? But back then I was a scrawny kid with anger issues and a smart mouth. Nobody wanted to deal with me. And for a long time I thought that meant I was unlovable, that there was something fundamentally broken inside me that everyone could see except me. Emma's voice was small. What changed? His smile was genuine warm. I met the angels. I was 19 working at a garage, still angry at the world. Some of the brothers would bring their bikes in for repairs, and eventually they started talking to me. Really talking, not like I was a problem to be solved, but like I was a person worth knowing. They saw past all my walls and defense mechanisms and anger, and they saw someone who just needed to be told they had value. He took a sip of his hot chocolate, then continued. The angels gave me a purpose, a family, a code to live by. And here's what I learned: the people who are supposed to love us don't always know how. Sometimes they're too broken themselves. Sometimes they're too scared. Sometimes they just don't have it in them. And that's a tragedy, but it's their tragedy, not yours. Emma felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. Ms. Reynolds' voice echoed in her memory, saying she would find Emma a place, but maybe her place wouldn't look like what she had imagined. Maybe family didn't have to look like the movies. The afternoon wore on, and Emma found herself relaxing in a way she couldn't remember ever feeling before. She took pictures with Diane's Polaroid camera, each one a small miracle of proof that this day had actually happened. Tommy the magician taught her a simple card trick. A biker named Chains, who earned his nickname from the elaborate chain wallet he wore, let her sit on his motorcycle and showed her how the controls worked. A woman named Phoenix, with full-sleeve tattoos of flames, braided Emma's long dark hair while telling stories about riding cross-country. As winter sun began to set, painting the Oregon sky in shades of orange and pink, someone started a bonfire in a metal drum. The bikers gathered around it, and someone pulled out an acoustic guitar. They sang not Christmas carols exactly, but rock songs and folk songs, and a few carols thrown in. Their voices were rough but sincere, and Emma found herself singing along to the ones she knew. Grace emerged from the apartment, eventually drawn by the noise or curiosity, or maybe something else. She stood at the edge of the gathering, arms crossed, watching. Big Mike noticed her and walked over. Emma watched from across the fire as they talked. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw Grace's defensive posture slowly soften, saw Big Mike gesture to the scene around them, saw Grace's face do something complicated, sadness and regret, and maybe just maybe a flicker of understanding. When Big Mike returned to the fire, he caught Emma's eye and nodded. It wasn't much, but it felt like something had shifted. As evening deepened and temperature dropped, families began to drift back to apartments, loaded down with gifts and leftover food. The bikers started to pack up, organizing themselves with the same efficiency they had shown when arriving. Several came to say goodbye to Emma, personally pressing cards with phone numbers into her hands, making her promise to call if she needed anything. Phoenix crouched down for a final hug. We mean it. You call that number on your little angel's card. Day or night, someone will answer. That's a promise. Emma nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. As the last of the daylight faded and the bikers began to mount their motorcycles, Lisa pulled Emma aside. They stood a little apart from the others in a moment that felt private despite the crowd. Lisa's voice carried weight. I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. Emma nodded, her small hand still clutching the little angel's card. Lisa continued, choosing her words carefully. What happened here today wasn't charity. This wasn't us feeling sorry for you. This was recognition. We recognize you, Emma. We see you. And more than that, we see what you could become. Emma's voice came out uncertain. What do you mean? Lisa smiled. You've got something special inside you, kid. I've seen a lot of children in rough situations over the years, and most of them have this look in their eyes like they've already given up, like they're just going through the motions. But not you. You're still fighting, still hoping, still believing that things could be better. That kind of strength is rare. That's precious. Emma admitted what she had been thinking all day. I don't feel strong. Lisa's response was immediate. The strongest people never do. But here's what I want you to remember. Every single person here today has been through hell. We've been broken and put back together. We've been counted out and written off, and we survived. More than that, we found ways to thrive. You can too. She pulled Emma into a tight hug, and Emma clung to her, breathing in the smell of leather and cold air and something that felt impossibly like hope. Lisa whispered into Emma's hair, one more thing. Ms. Reynolds is going to keep fighting for you. She's already been making calls, working on finding you a real placement, something stable. And when that happens, when you find your forever place, you come find us. You bring your new family to one of our rallies. Let them see that you've got a whole army of uncles and aunts who will raise hell if anyone tries to hurt you. You got that? Emma nodded against Lisa's shoulder, unable to speak. The motorcycles roared to life one by one, the sound echoing off the apartment buildings and rolling through the valley. Big Mike was the last to leave. He gave Emma one final bear hug that lifted her off her feet, then handed her a small wrapped package. His voice was gruff with emotion. Open it later, when you need a reminder. And then they were gone. 500 motorcycles streaming out of the parking lot and onto the highway, their tail lights like a river of red stars flowing through the darkness. The sound of their engines faded gradually until all that was left was the cold night air and the smell of wood smoke from the dying bonfire. Emma stood in the parking lot long after they disappeared, holding Big Mike's package, and feeling like the world had somehow expanded, like the walls that had been pressing in on her had suddenly been pushed back, revealing space she hadn't known existed. When she finally went back upstairs, Grace was in the kitchen, putting away the groceries that the bikers had brought. She didn't look at Emma when she spoke. Grace's voice was slow, careful. Those people. They think they can fix everything with presents and a party. Emma felt something sharp in her chest. Here it came, the dismissal, the tearing down of something beautiful. But then Grace continued, and her voice carried something Emma had never heard before. Maybe they can't fix everything, but they fixed something today. I saw your face down there by Emma. I haven't seen you smile like that since, well, since before your mama got bad. She finally turned to look at Emma, and her expression was complicated, not warm exactly, but not cold either, something in between. I'm not good at this, being a grandmother, being responsible for someone. I failed your mother so completely that I can't even look at you sometimes without seeing all my mistakes. But those bikers down there, they didn't see my mistakes. They saw a little girl who deserved better. And maybe they're right. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a promise that everything would change. But it was something, an acknowledgement, a crack in the armor that Grace had built around herself. Emma's voice came out quiet. Thank you for letting them come. Grace made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sigh. Like I could have stopped them. 500 bikers with a mission. They were getting in here one way or another. But when she turned back to the groceries, Emma thought she saw the ghost of a smile on her grandmother's weathered face. That night, lying on the couch under her new blanket, surrounded by presents and proof that this day had actually happened, Emma carefully opened Big Mike's package. Inside was a small silver necklace with a pendant shaped like a pair of angel wings. There was a note in rough handwriting. Emma, these wings are a reminder that you can fly even when the world tries to clip you. You're never alone. You're part of the angels now. Big Mike. Emma clutched the necklace to her chest and let the tears come. Not tears of sadness this time, but tears of relief. For the first time in 2 years, she felt like someone had actually seen her not as a burden or a problem or a reminder of someone else's failures, but as herself, as Emma, as someone worth 500 people riding through the cold to say you matter. Outside, Pinewood slept under its blanket of snow. But inside apartment 2C, a small girl lay awake wearing angel wings around her neck, and dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, the story of her life wasn't already written. Maybe there were chapters yet to come that she couldn't even imagine, chapters filled with people who chose her, who fought for her, who proved that family was something you built rather than something you were born into. And for the first time in a very long time, Emma Wilson fell asleep believing in tomorrow, even as a small voice in the back of her mind whispered the words Grace had spoken earlier: "Your father's parole hearing is next week." But tonight that worry felt distant, pushed back by the overwhelming proof that she was loved, that she mattered, that 500 strangers had become family in the space of a single extraordinary day. The morning after the angels left, Emma woke to silence that felt different from the hollow quiet she had known before. Grace's apartment looked transformed even in daylight. The Christmas tree still glowed softly in the corner. Presents remained stacked underneath the refrigerator, actually contained food that would last more than a day. Emma touched the angel wings necklace at her throat and confirmed that yesterday had been real, not some fever dream conjured by a desperate child's imagination. Grace emerged from her bedroom earlier than usual, moving with purpose instead of her typical shuffle. She poured coffee and stood at the window looking out at the parking lot, where tire tracks in the snow were the only evidence that 500 motorcycles had been there at all. Her voice came without the usual edge. "Ms. Reynolds called. She's coming by this afternoon, says she has news about a placement." Emma's stomach flipped. Placement, the word that usually preceded disappointment. But something in Grace's tone was different this time, less bitter, more resigned to the possibility that Emma might actually find somewhere better. Emma managed a quiet response. "Okay." Grace turned and studied her with that same complicated expression from the night before. "Those bikers. They really think you're special, you know, not just feeling sorry for you. Big Mike talked to me for a long time last night, then after you went in, told me about his own childhood. Made me realize some things I've been avoiding." Emma waited, not sure where this was going. Grace rarely spoke this much, especially about anything resembling feelings. Grace continued, the words coming slowly like she was pulling them from some deep, reluctant place. "I told you yesterday that some kids are born wrong. That was cruel, and it was a lie. The truth is, some grandmothers are broken, and they break everyone around them. I broke your mother, and I've been taking that out on you. But maybe it's not too late for you to have something better." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was acknowledgement, and coming from Grace that felt like progress. Emma crossed the small space and hugged her grandmother. Grace stiffened, initially unused to physical affection, then awkwardly patted Emma's back. When Ms. Reynolds arrived that afternoon, she brought someone with her, a woman Emma recognized from yesterday. Sarah Tommy, the magician's wife. Sarah wore jeans and a sweater instead of leather, but her angel's tattoo was visible on her wrist. Ms. Reynolds settled into the chair Grace offered, her expression cautiously optimistic. "Emma, I have good news. I've found what I believe could be an excellent placement for you. A couple in Bend, Rachel and Scott Mitchell. They're certified foster parents who specialize in children who have experienced trauma. They've had their license for 3 years and come very highly recommended." Emma's voice came out small and defensive. "What's wrong with them? Why do they need kids like me?" Sarah spoke up, her voice gentle with understanding. "Nothing's wrong with them, honey. I know it's hard to believe adults can just be good people, but they exist. The Mitchells lost their daughter 3 years ago. Car accident. She was 7, same age as you are now. They spent a long time grieving and healing, and when they were ready, they decided to become foster parents." Ms. Reynolds added detail. "Rachel is a nurse who works 3 days a week. Scott teaches history at Bend High School. They're specifically requesting to meet you, Emma. They know about your situation, about your mother, about the instability you've experienced, and they still want to meet you." Emma felt hope rising in her chest and immediately tried to squash it down. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment. But Sarah must have seen something in her face, because she reached over and took Emma's hand. Sarah's voice carried lived experience. "I was in foster care from age 9 to 17. 8 different homes. So I know exactly what you're thinking right now, that this will be like all the others, that they'll meet you and find some reason you're not good enough. But the Mitchells are different. Tommy and I have met them. The Angels helped fund their home study and certification through our Little Angels program. We wouldn't have done that if we didn't believe they were the real deal." Ms. Reynolds pulled out a folder with photos. This is their house. It's in the Old Mill District in Bend, been renovated. 3 bedrooms, big backyard, close to a really good elementary school. And this is the room that would be yours if things work out. Emma looked at the photo of a bedroom with yellow walls and large windows. It was empty except for a bed and a dresser, but somehow that emptiness felt like possibility rather than neglect, like a canvas waiting for her to fill it with her own story. Grace spoke from her recliner, surprising everyone. When would this meeting happen? Ms. Reynolds responded carefully. They're available this Friday if Emma feels ready. I could drive her to Bend, facilitate the introduction. If everyone feels comfortable, maybe Emma could stay for a trial weekend. Emma's mind raced. Friday was 3 days away. 3 days to prepare for something that could change everything or break her completely. She looked at the photo again, at that yellow bedroom with its promise of fresh starts, and made a decision that terrified her. Her voice shook but held. I want to meet them. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. The angels mobilized with impressive efficiency. Tommy and Sarah came by each evening after Grace got home from the grocery store, where she had suddenly resumed working part-time, needing something to fill hours that used to disappear into bottles and television. They coached Emma on how to handle the meeting. Tommy sat cross-legged on Grace's floor, performing card tricks while he talked. First rule, be yourself. Don't try to be who you think they want. If this is going to work, it has to be based on who you actually are. Sarah added from the couch where she was painting Emma's nails, a soft pink that Emma had picked from 6 different options. But also advocate for yourself. Ask questions. What are the rules? What happens if you mess up? What's their discipline style? Foster care works both ways, Emma. You're interviewing them as much as they're meeting you. Red arrived Wednesday evening with bags from Target. Interview outfit. First impressions matter, not because you need to perform, but because you deserve to feel confident. She had chosen well-dark jeans that actually fit a soft purple sweater, new sneakers that didn't come from a donation bin. Emma tried everything on in Grace's bathroom and barely recognized herself in the mirror. She looked like a normal kid, like someone who might actually belong in that yellow bedroom. Phoenix showed up Thursday with a gift that surprised Emma, a journal with a purple leather cover and blank pages. Phoenix's voice was matter-of-fact as she explained. For your feelings, writing helps process things that are too big to hold inside. And if things get hard with the Mitchells, if you're scared or angry or confused, you write it down before you act out. Give yourself time to understand what you're actually feeling. They practiced scenarios. Sarah played Rachel Mitchell while Tommy played Scott. Emma practiced asking questions, expressing needs, admitting fears. It felt awkward and artificial at first, but gradually Emma began to understand what they were teaching her, that she had value, that her feelings mattered, that she could participate in decisions about her own life instead of just accepting whatever adults decided for her. Thursday night, Grace surprised Emma by sitting down at the kitchen table where Emma was reading Charlotte's Web for Comfort. Grace's voice was careful, each word selected deliberately. I talked to my AA sponsor today. First time I've called her in 3 years. Told her about the angels, about you leaving, about how I've been drinking again. She reminded me that I can't control you leaving, but I can control how I handle it. Emma waited, not sure what to say. Grace continued, her fingers tracing patterns on the worn table surface. I'm going to a meeting tomorrow morning. First of 90. That's what they tell you to do when you relapse 90 meetings in 90 days. And I'm going to get my 3-year chip again eventually. Not for you exactly. You'll be in Bend with people who actually know how to care for a child. But maybe for me, maybe it's not too late for me to figure out how to be someone you'd want to stay in touch with. Emma's throat went tight. I'd like that, Grandma. The word hung in the air between them. Emma had never called the Grace Grandma before, always just Grace. The older woman's eyes went glassy for a moment before she blinked hard and stood abruptly. Grace cleared her throat roughly. Well, you should get some sleep. Big day tomorrow. Friday morning, Ms. Reynolds picked Emma up at 9. Grace walked her down to the car, and just before Emma climbed in, pressed something into her hand. It was a photo of Angela, young and healthy and smiling before the drugs had stolen everything. On the back, Grace had written, "Your mother at age 7. You have her courage." The drive to Bend took an hour through landscape that grew increasingly beautiful as they left the flatlands behind and entered the mountains. Ms. Reynolds kept the conversation light, pointing out landmarks and asking Emma about school and her favorite subjects. But as they entered Bend city limits, the counselor's tone shifted to something more serious. Ms. Reynolds pulled into a coffee shop parking lot and turned off the engine. Emma, before we get there, I need to prepare you for something. The Mitchells are wonderful people, but they're also grieving parents. Their daughter Lily died 3 years ago, and some days are harder than others. If you notice Rachel or Scott getting emotional, it's not about you. It's about their loss. Emma nodded, understanding suddenly why the Mitchells might want to foster a 7-year-old girl. She was the same age as the daughter they had lost. The thought should have made her uncomfortable, should have felt like she was being asked to replace someone. But somehow it didn't. It felt like maybe broken people could help other broken people heal. The Mitchells' house sat on a quiet street lined with mature trees and renovated homes that had once housed mill workers. It was a craftsman-style bungalow painted soft gray with white trim and a red front door. The yard was neat without being obsessive, and there was a tire swing hanging from an oak tree in the back that Emma could see from the driveway. Rachel Mitchell opened the door before Ms. Reynolds even knocked. She was in her early 40s with shoulder-length brown hair and kind eyes that showed signs of tears cried and survived. She wore jeans and a cardigan, and her smile when she saw Emma was genuine and nervous in equal measure. Her voice was warm, welcoming. Emma, we're so glad you're here. Please come in. Inside the house smelled like cinnamon and coffee. The living room was comfortable without being fussy, worn leather couch bookshelves packed with novels and history books, family photos on the mantel, including several of a little girl with blonde curls and Rachel's eyes. Scott Mitchell appeared from what Emma assumed was the kitchen. He was tall and lanky with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses, looking exactly like what you'd expect from a high school history teacher. Scott's greeting was gentle. Hi, Emma. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. Can I get you something to drink? We have juice, milk, soda, hot chocolate. Emma's voice came out quieter than she intended. Hot chocolate sounds nice. Thank you. They settled in the living room, and for a moment, nobody spoke, the adults clearly unsure how to begin. Emma decided to follow Sarah's advice about advocating for herself. She took a breath and spoke directly. Ms. Reynolds said you lost your daughter. I'm sorry. That must be really hard. Rachel's eyes went glassy, but her voice stayed steady. Thank you, Emma. Yes, it's been incredibly hard. Lily died in a car accident 3 years ago. A drunk driver ran a red light. For a long time, we couldn't imagine ever opening our home to another child. It felt like we'd be trying to replace her, which is impossible. But eventually we realized that we had all this love and nowhere to put it. And there are kids who need exactly that. Scott added, his words measured and honest. We want to be very clear with you, Emma. We're not looking for a replacement for Lily. We're looking to build something new, and we can't promise how long you'll be with us. Every placement is different. Some kids stay a few months, some longer. What we can promise is our commitment to you for however long you need us. Emma appreciated the honesty even as it scared her. What are your rules? What happens if I mess up? Rachel smiled at the directness of the question. Rules are pretty standard. Respect for everyone in the house, honest communication. Do your homework, help with chores appropriate to your age. As for messing up, everyone messes up, Emma. The question isn't whether you'll make mistakes. The question is what happens after. In this house, we talk about it. We figure out what went wrong and how to do better next time. And then we move forward. No grudges, no keeping score. Scott gestured toward the hallway. Would you like to see what would be your room if you decide you want to try staying with us? Emma nodded and followed them down a short hallway past what was clearly the master bedroom and a home office. The last door opened to the yellow bedroom from the photos, but seeing it in person was different. The walls were freshly painted, the hardwood floors polished, and the large window looked out onto the backyard with its tire swing and a garden bed that was dormant for winter, but would likely bloom in spring. Rachel's voice held careful hope. We left it mostly empty because we thought you might want to help decorate it. Choose your own bedding, decide how to arrange things. Make it yours. Emma walked to the window and looked out at the yard. She could imagine herself on that tire swing, could picture spring flowers in that garden bed, could envision mornings waking up to this view, instead of the parking lot at Grace's complex. It felt dangerous to want something this badly. Her voice was barely audible. It's beautiful. The rest of the visit passed in careful conversation. Scott showed Emma his classroom materials and talked about the history fair he organized each year. Rachel pulled out photo albums from trips they had taken: the Oregon, Coast Crater Lake, a camping trip to the Redwoods. They asked Emma questions about her interests, her favorite subjects, what she liked to do for fun. Emma found herself relaxing, incrementally drawn in by their genuine interest and the absence of pity in their eyes when they looked at her. As the afternoon light began to fade, Miss Reynolds gently raised the possibility that Emma had been simultaneously hoping for and dreading. The counselor's tone was carefully neutral. Rachel Scott, I know we discussed the possibility of a trial weekend. If everyone feels comfortable, Emma could stay tonight and through Sunday. Give everyone a chance to see how things feel in a more natural setting. Emma's heart hammered. This was it. The moment where they could change their minds, where they could see her more clearly and find her wanting. But Rachel and Scott exchanged a look that seemed to contain entire conversations, and when Rachel turned back to Emma, her smile was sure. Rachel's voice was steady and warm. We'd love that, if Emma wants to stay. Emma looked at Ms. Reynolds, who nodded encouragement. She thought about Grace's apartment, with its cigarette smell, and game shows. She thought about the Angels and their fierce love. She thought about her mother and Charlotte's Web, and all the ways she had learned to protect herself by expecting nothing. And then she thought about possibility, about yellow walls and tire swings, and people who talked about commitment even when they couldn't promise forever. She thought about what Red had said, that family was a choice, that blood didn't matter as much as showing up, that she deserved people who would fight for her. Emma's voice came out stronger than expected. I want to stay. Ms. Reynolds left after extracting promises to call if anyone needed anything, leaving Emma alone with the Mitchells for the first time. The silence that followed felt weighted with unspoken expectations and fears on all sides. Scott broke it with practical gentleness. How about we make dinner together? We were thinking pancakes for dinner. Breakfast food at night is one of the perks of being a kid in this house. Emma couldn't help the small smile. Pancakes sound good. They cooked together in the kitchen that was big enough for 3 people to move comfortably. Scott handled the griddle while Rachel mixed batter, and Emma was put in charge of setting the table. It felt startlingly domestic, like playing house, except this was real. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for them to realize they had made a mistake, but instead they just made pancakes and talked about nothing important and everything that mattered. After dinner, they walked along the Deschutes River that ran through Ben's old mill district. The sun had set, but streetlights illuminated the path, and the water moved with constant sound that Emma found soothing. Rachel pointed out landmarks: the bookstore, where she bought most of her novels, the theater where they saw movies, the park where summer concerts happened. Scott added with a grin, and that's Ray's Hardware, where I spend way too much money on projects I never finish. Rachel's laugh was genuine and warm. Last year he bought supplies for a tree house. The wood is still sitting in our garage. Emma spoke without thinking. I've never had a tree house. The words hung in the air, and Emma immediately regretted them. She sounded like she was asking for something, expecting them to build her a tree house just because she mentioned it. But Scott's response was thoughtful, not dismissive. His voice carried possibility without promises. Well, maybe that's a project we could work on together this spring. If you're still with us, I could use someone to help me actually follow through. Emma felt something warm bloom in her chest. If you're still with us, not when you leave, not acknowledging the inevitable rejection. Just a simple acknowledgement that maybe possibly she could stay long enough to see a project through from beginning to end. Saturday morning, Emma woke in the yellow bedroom and for a disoriented moment couldn't remember where she was. Then it came flooding back: the Mitchells, the trial weekend, the terrifying possibility that this could work. She climbed out of bed and found clothes laid out on the chair: jeans and a soft green sweater that Rachel must have left while Emma slept. The smell of coffee and bacon drew her to the kitchen, where both Mitchells were already up. Scott stood at the stove, while Rachel sat at the table with the newspaper and a steaming mug. They both looked up when Emma appeared, and their smiles seemed genuinely pleased to see her. Rachel's morning voice was slightly rough, but welcoming. Good morning. Did you sleep okay? Emma nodded. The truth was she had slept better than she had in months, but admitting that felt too vulnerable. Rachel seemed to understand and simply gestured to the chair next to her. The morning passed in comfortable domesticity, that Emma found both wonderful and terrifying. Breakfast was eggs and bacon and toast with homemade jam. Afterwards, Scott suggested they visit the bookstore Rachel had pointed out the night before. His offer was casual but meaningful. We have a tradition in this house. First weekend with us, a kid gets to pick 3 books. Any books they want, price doesn't matter. It's one of the few rules that's non-negotiable. The bookstore was exactly what Emma imagined heaven might look like: floor-to-ceiling shelves, cozy reading nooks, the smell of paper and possibility. She wandered the aisles while the Mitchells browsed separately, giving her space to explore on her own. Emma found herself drawn to stories about kids finding their place in the world, Anne of Green Gables' Bridge to Terabithia, and a newer book about a girl in foster care that the bookseller recommended. When they reconvened at the register, Scott saw her selections and something crossed his face. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. He didn't comment on the obvious theme, just paid for the books and handed Emma the bag like it was the most natural thing in the world. The afternoon brought a movie at home, all 3 of them piled on the couch with popcorn while an animated film played. At one point, Rachel's arm came around Emma's shoulders, a casual, protective gesture, and Emma felt herself relax into it, despite every instinct screaming to maintain distance. When the movie ended, Rachel didn't immediately pull away, and Emma found herself thinking that this specific moment felt like what home was supposed to feel like. Sunday morning arrived too quickly. Emma was supposed to return to Grace's apartment that afternoon, back to the familiar emptiness that now felt even more hollow by comparison. Over breakfast, Rachel and Scott exchanged looks that Emma was learning to recognize as silent communication. Scott finally spoke, his voice careful. "Emma, we've really enjoyed having you here this weekend. We'd like to talk about next steps if you're comfortable with that." Emma nodded, her stomach tight with hope and fear battling for dominance. Rachel took over, her words chosen deliberately. "We think this could work, the 3 of us together, but we want to do this right, which means taking time. What we're proposing is a transition period. Maybe you come for weekends, at first gradually spend more time here, slowly move your belongings. That way everyone has time to adjust to make sure this is what we all want." Emma's voice came out small. "How long?" Scott answered honestly. 6 weeks, maybe 2 months at most. By February, you could be living here full-time if everything continues to feel right. One, it wasn't the immediate transformation Emma had secretly hoped for, but she recognized the wisdom in what they were offering. Trust had to be earned on both sides. She nodded slowly. Her voice carried more conviction than she felt. "I'd like that." The drive back to Ashwood with Miss Reynolds was quiet. Emma stared out the window at the landscape, passing in reverse, carrying her back to the place that wasn't home but was familiar. When they pulled into the parking lot of Grace's complex, Emma saw something unexpected. Red's motorcycle parked near the entrance. Miss Reynolds noticed too. "Looks like you have a visitor." Upstairs, Emma found Red sitting at Grace's kitchen table with coffee, deep in conversation with Emma's grandmother. They both looked up when Emma entered, and Red's face split into a wide grin. Red stood and opened her arms. "There she is. How'd it go?" Emma fell into the hug and let herself be held for a moment before pulling back. "It was good, really good, really. They want me to come back next weekend." Grace spoke from her chair, her voice carrying something new: pride, maybe, or hope. "That's good, Emma. That's really good." Red explained her presence without being asked. "I came to check on your grandma. Made sure she got to her AA meeting this morning." First of 90. Emma looked at Grace with new eyes. Her grandmother held up a white chip, the kind they gave you at your first meeting after a relapse. Grace's voice was gruff but determined. "Day 1, doing it again, but I'm doing it." The next 6 weeks passed in a rhythm that became Emma's new normal. Weekends with the Mitchells in Bend, where she gradually began to let herself believe this might actually last. Weekdays in Ashwood with Grace, who was slowly becoming someone Emma could respect, if not quite love yet. And throughout it all, the Angels maintaining steady presence: phone calls from Lisa, checking in, surprise visits from Tommy, and Sarah, texts from Phoenix with encouraging words. But in the 3rd week, everything shifted. Miss Reynolds called for an emergency meeting at Grace's apartment. When she arrived, her expression was grim, and she had brought a woman Emma didn't recognize, professional looking, carrying a leather briefcase, wearing a suit that screamed lawyer. Ms. Reynolds made introductions with visible reluctance. "Emma, Grace, this is Patricia Chen. She's a family attorney who works with the Little Angels program. We have a situation. Patricia got straight to it, her voice professionally sympathetic. Emma, your biological father, Derek Carter, has filed paperwork from prison opposing any potential adoption. He's claiming his parental rights and asserting that when he's released in approximately 3 years, he intends to pursue custody. Emma's world tilted. Father. The word that had never meant anything to her before suddenly carried crushing weight. Derek Carter was a name she knew existed but had never connected to her reality. He had been in prison since before she was born, serving 15 years for armed robbery. She had never met him, never received a letter or call, had honestly assumed he didn't care that she existed. Grace's voice was sharp with old anger. That son of a bitch hasn't given her a second thought in 7 years. Now that someone actually wants her, suddenly he's claiming rights. Patricia nodded grimly. Unfortunately, it's not uncommon. Sometimes incarcerated parents see adoption as the final severing of connection and fight it even when they've shown no previous interest. And legally, he does have standing. He's her biological father, his rights were never terminated, and he hasn't done anything from prison that would qualify as abandonment under Oregon law. Emma found her voice, though it came out shaky. What does this mean for the Mitchells? Patricia's honesty was brutal but necessary. It means the adoption process just got significantly more complicated. Even if Derek remains incarcerated, his objection creates legal hurdles. The Mitchells could still pursue guardianship or long-term foster placement, but permanent adoption might require terminating Derek's rights, which could take months or even years of legal proceedings. Emma felt the yellow bedroom slipping away, felt the possibility of family dissolving like smoke. She thought about Rachel's arm around her shoulders, Scott's promise of a treehouse, the 3 books on her shelf that represented a tradition she might never be part of. Ms. Reynolds crouched in front of Emma. The Mitchells know about this development. I called them before coming here. They want you to know that this doesn't change anything for them. They still want you. They're still committed to you. This just means the path forward is more complicated than we hoped. But Emma barely heard the words of reassurance. All she could think was that even her father, who had never wanted her before, didn't want anyone else to have her either. It felt like proof of everything Grace had said on Christmas Eve, that some kids were born wrong, that she carried something inside her that made love impossible. Red arrived within the hour, summoned by Grace in a moment of surprising maternal instinct. The nurse took one look at Emma's face and pulled her into a fierce hug. Red's voice was firm against Emma's hair. Listen to me very carefully. This is not about you. This is about a man who spent 15 years in prison making one last grab at control. He doesn't want you, Emma. He wants to have power over something, anything, because he has no power in there. You are not the problem. He is. But the damage was done. When Emma went to the Mitchells' house that Friday for what should have been another good weekend, she carried Derek's shadow with her. She was quiet at dinner, withdrawn during their evening walk, distant in ways she hadn't been before. Rachel and Scott tried to maintain normalcy, but Emma could see the worry in their eyes, the fear that she was already pulling away. Saturday morning, Emma woke early and found herself drawn to the kitchen where Rachel was making coffee. The house was quiet, Scott still asleep, and somehow that made what Emma needed to say easier. Her voice came out flat, defensive. You should probably give up on me. My father's never going to agree to adoption, and in 3 years he'll get out and you'll have wasted all this time on someone you can never really keep. Rachel turned from the coffee maker, her expression cycling through surprise and pain before settling on fierce determination. She crossed the kitchen and sat down across from Emma. Rachel's voice was steady, uncompromising. Emma Wilson, look at me. Emma reluctantly met her eyes. Rachel continued without hesitation. I don't give up on people I care about. Neither does Scott. Derek Carter can file all the paperwork he wants. He can object from prison until he's blue in the face. It doesn't change the fact that you're ours now. Maybe not legally yet, maybe not permanently, but in every way that actually matters, you're ours. And we fight for what's ours. Emma felt tears threatening. But what if Rachel's interruption was gentle but firm? No what ifs, just what is. What is you're 7 years old and you deserve stability? What is we have a spare bedroom and enough love to share? What is we're going to keep showing up for you regardless of how complicated the legal situation gets? That's what is. Scott appeared in the doorway, having clearly heard at least part of the conversation. He came and sat beside Rachel, presenting a united front. His voice carried the same unwavering certainty. Emma, when Lily died, we thought we'd never recover. We thought the grief would swallow us whole. But eventually we learned that love doesn't run out. It's not a finite resource that gets used up. If anything, love grows when you share it. So this thing with your father, it's an obstacle. It's a complication, but it's not a deal breaker. We're in this with you for as long as you'll have us. Emma broke then, the tears coming in great heaving sobs. Rachel gathered her into a hug while Scott's hand rested warm on her back, and Emma cried for her mother and her absent father and her broken grandmother, and every single time she had been promised something that dissolved before she could hold it. But she also cried from relief because the Mitchells weren't running. They weren't finding excuses. They were staying. When the tears finally subsided, Emma found herself wrapped in a blanket on the couch between Rachel and Scott, hot chocolate in hand, feeling wrung out but somehow lighter. Rachel spoke quietly. Here's what's going to happen next. Patricia Chen is one of the best family attorneys in Oregon, and the Angels are funding her fees. She's going to start building a case for terminating your father's parental rights. It won't be quick or easy, but it's possible. In the meantime, you continue transitioning here. You start school at Bend Elementary after Christmas break. You make this house your home regardless of what the paperwork says. Scott added practical detail. And next weekend, we're going to build that treehouse because you're going to be here in the spring to use it. Emma managed a watery smile. You really think so? Rachel's certainty was absolute. I know so. The following Monday, Emma started at Bend Elementary and within days learned that stability in one area didn't guarantee peace in others. Word spread quickly among students that the new girl was connected to the Hells Angels. In a small town like Bend, where most families had lived for generations, and everyone knew everyone else's business, Emma's unusual situation made her a target for curiosity and cruelty in equal measure. By the end of her first week, someone had written biker trash on her locker in black marker. Emma stared at the words during lunch period, feeling the familiar curl of shame in her stomach. She hadn't done anything wrong, but somehow she was still marked as different, as lesser, as someone who didn't belong. The selective mutism that had plagued her after her mother's death began creeping back. Emma found herself unable to speak in class, even when she knew the answers, her throat closing around words that wouldn't come. Teachers expressed concern to Rachel, who responded with patience, but Emma could see the worry in her foster mother's eyes. Phoenix heard about the bullying through the Angels network and showed up at the Mitchell's house on Saturday unannounced. She took Emma out to the backyard and spent 2 hours teaching her not physical self-defense, but emotional protection. Phoenix's voice was matter-of-fact, sharing hard-won wisdom. Words only have the power you give them. Someone calls you biker trash, you own it. Yeah, and those bikers showed me more love in one day than most people see in a lifetime. Someone questions your worth. You remember that 500 people rode through snow to prove you matter. The best revenge is refusing to be diminished. She gave Emma homework every morning: look in the mirror and say 3 things you like about yourself. Emma protested that it felt stupid, but Phoenix was immovable. Phoenix's insistence was fierce. Stupid is what keeps you strong. Do it. Tommy visited the following week and with the Mitchells' permission arranged to do a magic show at Bend Elementary during lunch. Emma cringed at the idea, certain it would make her even more of a target, but Tommy was unfazed. He performed in the cafeteria with skill that suggested he had done this many times before. Kids watched in amazement as he made cards disappear and reappear, pulled coins from ears, levitated objects with apparent ease. And at the end, he dedicated his final trick to Emma, explaining without apology that she was his honorary niece, that she was part of the Angels family, that anyone who had a problem with that could take it up with 500 bikers who took family very seriously. The bullying didn't stop completely, but it shifted. Some kids remained hostile, but others became curious, asking questions about the Angels, wanting to know about the Christmas miracle. Emma found herself making tentative friends: a girl named Sophie from her math class, who thought the Angels were cool, a boy named Marcus, who loved motorcycles and wanted to know everything about different bike models. Meanwhile, Grace's redemption arc unfolded at a distance. Emma called her grandmother every Sunday evening and tracked her progress through AA, 30 meetings, then 60, then 90. Grace's voice changed over those weeks, becoming clearer, somehow less weighted by bitterness. She talked about her sponsor, Helen, about amends she was making to people she had hurt over the years, about trying to understand why she had spent so many years drowning instead of swimming. On Emma's eighth Sunday call, Grace said something that made Emma's breath catch. Grace's voice was tentative but genuine. "I talked to my therapist about you yesterday, about how I blamed you for your mother's mistakes, about the things I said on Christmas Eve. And I want you to know I'm working on it, on being someone you'd want to stay connected to. Not because I think I can make up for how I treated you, but because you deserve better than what I gave you." Emma's voice was thick with emotion. "I'd like that, Grandma. I'd really like that." Red continued driving Grace to meetings, refusing payment, but accepting Grace's gratitude. Emma learned through the Angels Network that Red had also connected Grace with resources, a better therapist, job training programs, social services that could help with the apartment's mold problem. The Angels didn't just help kids, Emma realized. They helped whoever was in the orbit of those kids, understanding that children couldn't thrive in isolation from their families, however broken those families might be. But the shadow of Derek Carter continued to loom. Patricia Chen filed motions arguing that Derek had abandoned Emma through complete lack of contact or support, that his imprisonment demonstrated unfitness, that Emma's best interests clearly lay with the Mitchells. The state set a hearing for March, 4 months away, when Derek would have the opportunity to present his case for maintaining parental rights. Emma tried not to think about it, but the court date hung over everything like a storm cloud waiting to break. The Mitchells maintained normalcy with determined effort, movie nights, and homework help in the treehouse project that Scott actually followed through on, working with Emma on weekends to build a platform and walls and a rope ladder in the old oak tree. February brought Emma's official move into the Mitchells' house full-time. Ms. Reynolds helped transport the last of Emma's belongings from Grace's apartment: clothes, books, the angel wings necklace that Emma wore every single day, the journal Phoenix had given her that was now half filled with thoughts and fears and hopes Emma was learning to articulate. Grace hugged Emma goodbye with surprising fierceness. "You call every Sunday? And you come visit when you can. I'm not done working on being someone you can count on." Emma promised and meant it. Grace was broken, but she was trying, and that counted for something. The Mitchells threw a small celebration that evening, Emma's official moving-in party. It was just the three of them, plus Big Mike and Lisa, who rode down from Portland bearing gifts. They ate pizza and played board games, and at the end of the night, Rachel gave Emma a small wrapped box. Inside was a key on a chain with a tag that read, "Home." Rachel's voice was soft but sure. "This is your home now, Emma. Legally, we're still working through complications, but in every way that matters, this is your home, and you're our daughter. This key is a promise that you always have a place here, regardless of what courts or biological fathers or anyone else says." Emma clutched the key and thought about the yellow bedroom that now held her books and clothes and art supplies, about the tree house half finished in the yard, about Sunday dinners and homework at the kitchen table, and the way Scott's terrible dad jokes made her groan even as she smiled. She thought about Grace working through her meetings one day at a time, and the Angels maintaining their protective circle, and Ms. Reynolds, who had refused to stop fighting for her. And she thought about possibility that maybe broken things could be put back together in new configurations, that maybe love was what you built rather than what you were born into, that maybe she could fly even when the world tried to clip her wings, just like Big Mike's note had promised. The March court date was approaching, and Emma knew the real battle was just beginning. But tonight in this house, with these people wearing her key necklace and